Accessing library computer data.
Out there are no saints. Just people.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Continuing our run through Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Right now we're up to the episode called Covenant. It is the 9th episode of the 7th season. Aired on 25th of November 1998. Written by Renee Echevarria. Directed by John Kretschmer. In this episode, Kira is abducted by a cult that worships the Pah-Wraiths and is led by their master, Dukat. We're joined by Clay, who is nobody's master. How are you?
Good. I don't know how to take that.
I was going to say, well, I had two options there. I could say you are my master or you're nobody's, and neither one felt appropriate for me to say. So, yeah.
You know, jack of all whatever is master of none, I guess. I don't know. Yeah. I hate relationship Odo so much. Mm-hmm. And I wish everybody else hated him as much as I do. I mean, everybody else on the show. Like, I wish there was a scene where O'Brien and Bashir were just like, oh, Jesus Christ.
Just
O'Brien
making that cracking the whip noise in the background constantly.
Ever since they got together, he just is the worst.
He's pretty weak here. It's like the worst high school thing where it's like, oh, you're into religion? Maybe I should get into religion as well.
Have any of you ever listened to Billy Joel?
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Kira really likes Billy Joel, and I would love to get into Billy Joel.
I stick to the show has a BC and AD of the Kira and Odo thing. It's like a fundamental shift in the show, I think. But this is a Kira episode. We're going to talk about Covenant, the return of Gul Dukat, who just a Kat, I guess, at this point. He's no longer a Gul. But we'll get into all of that. After this, I'm going to take a break, play an audio clip. Me and Clay will come back, and we're going to break down Covenant.
Benyon is Mika's husband.
Oh, congratulations. I understand it isn't easy to get permission to have a baby.
The master told us you wouldn't approve of our ways. He said we should be patient with you.
Don't go out of your way.
I don't understand why he brought you here. Benyon.
That's all right.
We all work very hard for what we have. We don't need you or anyone else to approve of us.
Fair enough.
Don't misunderstand. I hope you come to feel the love of the Pah-Wraiths. But if you don't, it's your loss. No offense.
None taken. In fact, I've always found that when people try to convince others of their beliefs, it's because they're really just trying to convince themselves.
Very, 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 very weird episode, I think, here, Clay. I don't know. I don't find this one to be awful. I don't find it to be great at anything. I think what it actually does is it's a prime example of what I think is actually DS9's fundamental flaw as a show, or like the biggest problem that it has, which is this weird, clumsy collision of serialized story and episodic Star Trek combining into this thing that is now going on for 175 episodes at this point. And I think that as we're entering season 7, if you're not outright running out of ideas for characters and sort of becoming redundant, Dukat is an example of becoming redundant through the fact that the writers constantly change his motivations throughout the series. And he's still a good character, I think, but it almost becomes like you start to become aware on a meta level of like, Jesus, does this guy ever just stick to one thing as he's going through his career? Or is he going to bounce back and forth? And
he's a hustler, baby. You got to keep moving.
He's like a shark. He's got to keep moving or he'll just drop dead. But that's pretty much my major takeaway from this one, because I think this one is sort of interesting, but at the same time, it also is like, oh, you start to see DS9 for what it is, I think, and you start to see the problems. And I think he's the character that exemplifies those problems more than any. But what do you think of Covenant?
You know, yeah, it's kind of weird from a character standpoint with Dukat, because I feel like they've kind of moved away from him. So they're not really, and they moved away from him and they kind of made him go nuts.
I think that's the episodic thing. I'll say it before you go back to you, but Nog is kind of the same. Like, because they're an episodic TV that's not really what you'd consider modern television, they can't kill off characters like him. Like, you feel like Dukat
Right.
should have ended after Waltz or maybe Wrong's Darker Than Death or Night or whatever. He doesn't. So you can feel the strings of the writers having to pull things to bring him back onto the show. And that's what it always feels like when he comes back. And it's a little bit distracting, where same with Nog's leg. Like, Nog, you could argue maybe should have died in the Siege of AR 558, but he didn't because they have to keep him around. It's the same with Dukat.
Yeah. I think those things kind of collide in this episode really interestingly, because from a serial standpoint, I don't think you can really feel them trying to stretch to have a reason to bring Dukat back. But I mean, we are like almost halfway through the season, right?
Yes. Third of the way. Yeah. Moving on to half.
Third of the way through the season, he hasn't even shown up yet. This is the first time he's shown up, I think, right?
I think so. Yep.
Yeah. However, from an episodic standpoint, I actually really enjoyed this episode. I thought it was really interesting because it dealt with the prophet stuff in a way that I actually was kind of invested in and found was an interesting take on it. And I think using Dukat to do that was the right character to do it with, instead of coming up with some, if it had just been Vedic Farquaad or whatever his name was.
Yeah, the guy that they introduce here.
Yeah, a guy you'd never seen before. You wouldn't really give a shit. But like the fact that Dukat shows up and he's like, I have seen the light and all of these people are with me, and actually it's your religion that's wrong. It's like then you actually have some character relationship, and the history's built into it. And it went excuse me. It went a little straightforward culty about halfway through, but the stuff that they were putting, the ideas that they were positing at the beginning, I actually found really fascinating and I was happy that they got into that stuff. Specifically, the sort of from a point of view of Dukat, I think this is a really twisted and brilliant way to run this through his filter.
Yeah.
Which is the sort of Jesus Christ Superstar take on Judas, where it's like, well, if we're being fair, if this is all part of the God's plan, then technically all I was doing was just following the God's plan, right? So if you believe that, then all of the shit stuff that I did to you, I mean, I wasn't at fault. I was just following the order. I was just flowing along the river of the prophets. And for Kira to be like, well, no, you can't do that. And he's like, I don't know. I feel like
Prove me wrong. Prove me wrong.
It's sort of the flip side of the the thing where it's like, oh, if there's the conceit of The Exorcist, which is if there's a devil, that must then mean there is a God. That sort of thing, where it's like there can't be one without the other. And it's sort of the flip side of that, where it's like, okay, well, if this is all part of the plan of a deity or whatever, then I guess I just was doing what I was being told to do. So I find that really fascinating, because they've never pushed back on any of that stuff, like the stuff where he was I can't remember if they exactly got into this or if I was hoping they were going to get into this. The idea that no, they didn't touch on this. I was thinking about this in my head because they were bringing these things up, and I was thinking like, couldn't you go at Kira and be like, well, how come they only talked to Cisco? How come the prophets went out of their way to destroy the Dominion fleet, but they let you suffer for 50 years? Mm-hmm. You can get into that kind of argument, and he's kind of not wrong. And he's the perfect person to do that because he's such a manipulator. But once it went straight culty, I like that too, because I like cults. I think that's fun. As soon as when they did the thing with the pregnant woman, I was like, okay. And then as soon as they brought it up again, I was like, oh, I know how this is going. Mm-hmm. And I was right, obviously.
That's something that's actually kind of an interesting thing about it too. I guess we'll push that off for a little bit, but it's definitely a Paradise Lost version of DS9 of how they're approaching the who's to say Lucifer isn't the hero of this story,
right? Yeah,
and it's the other thing that I remember when we were growing up in high school and you learned about the different sects of Christianity or whatever. And when I was younger and you heard about Calvinism, it sounded so insane because you're like, well, what is this religion that they're like, well, basically you are determined at birth whether or not you are damned or not. Like there's nothing you could do for yourself as a Calvinist ideology of like you're either born of sin or whatever, or you're just going to go to heaven. There's like nothing you can do. It's all preordained. And you're like, what a crazy belief system. But as you get older, how can you have an omnipresent God and not have that be the case where things are predetermined? That's the only way that it seems to make sense. There can't be any kind of free will if you have a being who knows everything about everything and who knows. Go ahead.
There's I've had this discussion with Dave every now and then about how the other thing that I found interesting about this is they do touch on sort of the hypocrisy of forgiveness and how you can use that as a sort of get out of jail free card when it suits your purposes. Like say if you have a politician who's going to pack the courts for you but has a really questionable past and doesn't make sense that you as some sort of religious person would be on their side, but as long as you forgive them, then it's fine. And they kind of get into that a little bit here where Kira is talking to Vedic Funbags about,
I think his name is Fala. Fala.
Okay.
Yeah.
About how can you follow this guy? And he's like, oh, I've forgiven him. All is forgiven. It's like, oh, okay. Yeah, sure. Dave and I have kind of talked about that, how there's a fundamental conflict as someone who is believes in an all-powerful God and ascribes to the concept of it's all part of God's plan, but also is someone who believes in the concept of free will, because they fundamentally don't agree with each other.
No, they are at odds. Yeah. The idea is that he gave you free will, which is kind of an out of the God is no longer responsible for what you do.
Yeah.
But that doesn't seem to jive with the fact that the creator of the universe is responsible for everything that ever happens.
Right.
So it's a way to blame people for their problems while still having the idea that an all powerful deity exists on top of that. Yeah. It is because it is like
oh, go ahead.
Well, the science of the forgiveness is strange because it relies completely on the honesty of the person who's saying that they need forgiveness. And Dukat obviously is not that character, but you have a hard time claiming that someone does not forgive, which I guess ties into Dukat's whole thing here, where there's no way to end this episode and not think that Dukat is a believer in the Pah-Wraiths, right? Because they have that scene where he prays by himself to the Pah-Wraiths. He clearly believes it. And I think that the prayer scene where he's by himself actually does damage to it, because I would prefer to not be aware of what Dukat thinks in this episode. Yeah. And I also don't like the ending where Kira's like, well, now he's a super bad guy. And you go like, okay, thank you for clarifying that. I would prefer that throughout the course of the episode, like they do with the sexual assault scene where the baby is born, you're never clear why that has happened or what Dukat thinks about things or why he's gone this route. They have to bring him back as Dukat. They kind of have to have him be the charlatan Joseph Smith character here, where he's like, he's fraudulent in what he's doing. But I think it's much more interesting if they play it the other way, where you are completely unsure about whether or not this is forgiveness, and it's Dukat who can't not do the bad things, but he's trying to not be that Dukat character that he was. He's trying to find the righteous path of the Pah-Wraiths or whatever. And unfortunately, they can't do that because they have to bring him back into the fold and they have to set him up as a bad guy. And the Pah-Wraiths are bad. Similar to what you were saying, this struck me as an episode where we've talked before about it. You just accept that the prophets are good and the Pah-Wraiths are bad. Right. This lays out a case that might not be the case, but it has no evidence to support either direction of that. Like you either just accept the prophets at face value or the Pah-Wraiths, and there's no good argument as to one way or the other, except for Dukat's thing about, well, the prophets let you guys get suffered for 80 years or whatever in your Dominion occupation or Bajoran occupation.
Yeah, that scene where they have him praying doesn't super jibe with the end of it, where he's kind of does the shifty eye thing and then like jetpacks out of there essentially.
Yeah.
Because it seems like it's something he believes in, but at the end he clearly is just trying to cover his tracks and get out of there without any incident.
What do you think he's actually trying to do in this episode? I think this is a problem for me because I would be fine with the ambiguity And I'd be like, well, it's just, he's doing it because he's trying to find the right path and he can't. But the ending makes it clear that that's not the case. He seems to have some other ulterior goal in mind.
Well, I mean, you could argue that technically he is being quote unquote honest in what he's trying to do, and that the result of his prayer wasn't the Pah-Wraiths telling him you need to kill everybody, but it was just him of his own mind going, maybe I need to kill everybody.
So you think that he thinks that his baser instincts are what the Pah-Wraiths want?
Possibly, yeah. I think you could read it that way if you wanted to. But the end scene is very much playing as someone who's been discovered, and the charlatan who's been discovered, and him
where he realizes he doesn't want to die in the Heaven's Gate type knockoff story where he's like, everyone drink the Kool-Aid and put on your Nikes and let's kill ourselves.
Yeah. For the record, it's Flavor Aid in real life.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. Just got to be accurate for my last podcast.
Do you remember the news footage when that came out? How they showed that on TV where everyone was dead under sheets on the bunk beds with their feet sticking out, and they just showed that? I remember being young and watching that. Well, not young, but like a teenager.
I don't remember how they did it for Heaven's Gate, how they killed themselves.
They drank Kool-Aid, poison.
No, that was Jonestown. Unless Heaven's Gate also did that.
I think they also did it. I think they drank poisoned Kool-Aid or something. I can look it up, but you finish your point.
Yeah. I forget what I was saying. What was I saying?
No, you talk about Dukat's exit there. The ending of his story.
Yeah. It's that last scene kind of undercuts any of that because it's very much a being found out scene, and he's doing the frantic yelling, saying, "Now none of you are gonna get it. You guys, you know what? You blew it. You were this close to enlightenment, but you guys all blew it." And that doesn't seem very honest and doesn't seem very sincere. And the way he, jetpacks out of there doesn't feel very sincere either. Like, I think there's a way you could probably end it where it is more sincere, but yeah, I think it is. I think I would have appreciated the more ambiguity as to what his motives actually were. Honestly, the making it, I feel like it's the fact that they, what am I trying to say? I don't totally know what his motives were, and I think making it more ambiguous would have actually helped it actually mean something more as a story, if that makes sense.
Yep. I'll chase that. I'll just say that the Heaven's Gate people took phenobarbital mixed with applesauce and pudding and washed it down with vodka. And they applied plastic bags around their heads after ingesting it to induce asphyxiation. So
yeah,
that's it. And I remember that being a kid and them showing that on TV. It was like, wow, this is strange. But
I remember. Do you remember they did a bit on SNL? It was like a fake. I think it was SNL. It was a fake. Might have been Mad TV because this feels pretty crass. It was a fake commercial where they panned through. They used the footage of finding everybody dead there and panned through and showed that they were all wearing Nikes, and then it just at the bottom it just had the Reebok logo.
Yeah. It's not bad, actually. I guess since they killed themselves, you can kind of have loosey-goosey rules or whatever. But what a strange group. People should look up the Heaven's Gate cult if you're unfamiliar. They're very strange. A lot of Star Trek nomenclature if you want to have a Star Trek impact on your sort of cult, death, suicide things. Nerds
with power are very dangerous.
I think one of the problems with an episode like this, if you're not going to be ambiguous, is the fact that because the whole episode is kind of about faith and what you take on faith and like what you don't recognize about faith, when you have when you try to have like a rational criticism of it, it doesn't seem fair to it in some ways. Like to complain about the story direction in this because it is not ambiguous, it seems logical to do. And I think the episode would have benefited from an ambiguous nature that basically protects the fact that you can't tell what Dukat believes. And Dukat's belief system is like core and central to everything. And so if you start having things like him jetpacking out, as you say at the end, or Kira even saying, like, well, now he's definitely a bad guy, that undermines everything that you've done before that. And all the interesting parts of this episode come before that, when it's all the setup and you don't know what Dukat is up to and the pregnancy and everything like that. And you're like, well, where is this coming from? And once it delves into something else outside of that to bring Dukat back, I don't think it's really as good, because if you want to bring Dukat back, I can see him coming back for this episode. And I think that he is the perfect person to relate to the Pah-Wraiths in that way. Like, he makes sense as a twisted mirror of Sisko. He calls himself the emissary in this, which is like perfect for everything that they want to do with that. It's just the fact that the Pah-Wraiths aren't defined and Dukat is over-defined. So the two should have mixed better there, I think. It would be my solution to it.
Do you think it would have been a benefit or not benefit? I can't remember what the word. To have at the end, after while he's yelling about them not being part of the glory of the Pah-Wraiths or whatever, instead of having him just teleport out of there, if they had actually had the Pah-Wraiths like remove him.
Oh, sure.
Like have his eyes glow red or something, and then, I don't know,
shoots at the wall.
Slingshot comes out of his chest and he just repels out of there by energy beam. Just to make it a little bit more fuzzy as to who's going
in charge. Yeah, because who beams him out? Because he's not associated with the Dominion anymore at this point, I don't think, because he says the thing about how he's hiding there on Empok Nor from them. So if it's a Dominion that transported him, it would make a lot more sense, wouldn't it? To have it not be to have it be Pah-Wraith enabled that gets him out of there. I think that's the only way that they could have gone. They chose not to for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I mean, I guess you could assume he has a escape pod ready or something, that he just beams himself directly to the escape pod or something.
Well, that implies a larger plot for him. I guess not, though. I guess you could just say that this is all in Dukat's character, and he is saying that his character is enabled by the gods, and so whatever he does must be righteous in that sense. So it's one of those things. It's not going to be a satisfying resolution. You can kind of get out of loopholes or problems with the episode because it's supposed to be about that, which I don't think is necessarily a problem, but I don't know if the episode embraces that idea fully.
Yeah, I guess it's tough to do an episode about faith where the tough thing about doing episodes or stories about faith is that I can't tell if it undercuts it if the faith turns out to be real.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like if you're doing an episode about faith and belief and taking things on faith, and then you have God literally show up, does that not sort of undercut the point of what you're doing? So I guess maybe having him removed by the Pah-Wraiths would kind of undercut that. But I mean, I guess you could.
It doesn't undercut his argument, though, like because you know that the Pah-Wraiths exist at this point. It doesn't. I don't think it undercuts his argument because you're still unsure whether or not he is right in terms of what the best case scenario is for Bajor.
Yeah,
and
I mean, they are, the Pah-Wraiths are like you were saying. It feels like from the standpoint of the people who make the show and the way we're supposed to perceive it, the Pah-Wraiths are bad and the prophets are good. So having the Pah-Wraiths show up at the end or whatever, use their magic to get him out of there, doesn't hurt our understanding of them. And it does hurt the understanding of the people who are following them, which I guess also that still works then.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt Dukat either, I don't think, because that would enable his escape.
Because I mean,
sense for him as
it's clear from his actions previously that he is at least in some way, a servant of the Pah-Wraiths, because they possessed him and then he blasted Jadzia with his chest beam.
Yep. And now he prays to them.
Yeah, and now he prays to them. So it wouldn't be out of character for them to yank their emissary out of there. And then it could be like, oh well. I think in that case, maybe it actually is a little bit more interesting in the end anyway, because then once the fake suicide is exposed, it seems like, oh, he's just trying to cover his path, his steps.
Yep.
But if the Pah-Wraiths actually yank him out of there, you kind of go, oh no, the Pah-Wraiths wanted him to kill everybody.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. It's I do like them setting him up as the Antichrist figure, because I think if you're going to have Cisco as the emissary, you need to have him as his counterpoint in that way. And so I think it's important, and having the Pah-Wraiths help him at the end would show that they similarly believe in him. And this is not Dukat's megalomania that's acting up. Like, if it's Dukat's, it's tough, because I think if you want to pay off the prophet stuff, you kind of have to go into this way of being. I thought that they could have continued the being more of a Star Trek-y thing if it's about the perspective of this cult and them not necessarily being wrong. Like it is more of a Paradise Lost kind of story. I like that as well, because we don't know anything about the Pah-Wraiths or the prophets at this point. So it seems strange to align yourself with one side or the other based purely on Kira, who comes in as a believer and goes, "Your gods are nonsense," which is another funny thing about it. Like it's the religious person coming in and saying, "Well, my gods are real, but your gods are clearly fake." And this seems obvious to me, and it's self-evident to me. They don't really go about that, and them not doing anything about that is tough, because it makes the cult people look like idiots in a lot of ways. Like especially during the birth scene where the Cardassian baby comes out and Dukat's like, it's a miracle. Like no one in the audience goes like, what the hell? Like this is the more logical explanation. And that leads into the bizarre scene where he decompresses the bay and she doesn't get sucked out into space, I don't think.
She gets slammed against the door because apparently the door opens very, very slowly. And technically it does and it doesn't make sense, I think, because I don't think they're not taking into account all of the physics rules, because I think the idea is that since the door opens slowly, she gets sucked towards the door and hits the door. So once all the air, it's like when a car fills up with water.
I see. The force of her gets stopped, so she doesn't keep going. Yeah.
So once all the air gets sucked out of the airlock, then there's no more vacuum. You know.
Yes.
So once all that air is gone, if she's just getting pressed against the thing, she's not going to get sucked out, and therefore she can just lay on the floor. However, you would also think that there would be no gravity, in which she would just float out the door. But I guess there's no air, but the gravity lock is still working or something. I don't know.
The station is big enough where she gets stuck to it from its own gravitational pull.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the... I wasn't crazy about that, because that seems like a very writerly, I need to kill her but have her still be around here somewhere where she can't get totally removed. But I do like sorry, go ahead. Well, I do like the scene between them two, those two, because it's ambiguous as to whether or not this is some sort of callback to Dukat's past as a kind of like man of the ladies, as he thinks of himself, or whether or not she was coerced into it, or whether or not she believes that he is this prophet that he talks about. And I don't think that scene plays any particular way specifically. And I think that it's nice that it doesn't do that, because you end up not being sure about whether or not who's a part of what and who isn't a part of that. And I think that that's important to the episode, but they undo that the rest of the way.
Yeah, I like that scene, because at first you think, she was just having an affair with him, but then as it goes on, it reads as though, I think he like raped her.
Yeah.
It's very ambiguous there about what's going on. And I think that was a really interesting way to play it. Does it not make sense to kill the father though?
You would think so. That would be the...
I mean, whatever. It makes sense. You have that scene. I guess he's got to do something, and she's there. So
he's got to be there to get angry about it. But yeah, he's that scene with the baby, just Dukat making the best of a bad situation there, I think is fairly...
Speaking of the father, I actually liked that scene, that first scene with him and Kira, where she's introduced to him as he's doing the painting, and they have that kind of back and forth about stuff. I thought that was good. I like that back and forth they had. Where he says like, "I know what I believe in," and she's like, "That's what scares me." That was good stuff. I like that.
Yeah. Because I like the cult of the Pah-Wraiths. I think that's an interesting or like a necessary idea. Yeah, it makes sense, and it's something that they could have done with. I thought that this episode did a good job with that. It's just it might just come down to the lack of understanding you have about the prophets in general and how well you can build off a mirror image of something that you're not really familiar with in the first place. So how effective can that be? Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, outside of that, I think the other thing that really works for it is Dukat is the perfect cult leader. Like you couldn't really come up with a better person to become a leader of this group than him. And I think that really works cleverly and well. And it does reinsert Dukat back into the narrative. It's really just like the nuts and bolts of it that doesn't work for me. But I think that he's well executed and Alemo's just so strong as Dukat that there's no way they can't bring him back.
Yeah, he's excellent. I'm glad that he is back. If they had to force him in, that's fine. Because I think they wrote themselves into a corner by doing what they did with him at the end of the season, by essentially moving him off of the board without killing him or anything.
Right.
Speaking of killing, you don't have to spoil it and tell me what happens, but does he survive to the end of the show?
Yes.
He does. Okay. Because I was kind of hoping that Worf would get to kill him at the end of the series. I thought that would be a good way to send him out.
Yeah. No, yeah, he's...
In my head, I was thinking, they have him dead to rights, and Kira stops from killing him, and then Worf just steps in and batleths his head off or something.
It's like the Thanos scene from Endgame. Yeah. He's a prominent part of the final 10 episode arc. So
okay, that's good.
Yeah, I think that's really all I have to say about this one. I guess we'll just take a break. We'll play an audio clip. Me and Clay will come back. We'll read some Patron thoughts and give our final thoughts about Covenant.
Listen to me.
Tell them, Dukat. Tell them you never had any intention of dying with them.
My time here is not finished. The Pah-Wraiths want me to continue bringing others into their light.
This is his child. That's why you tried to kill Mika.
The Pah-Wraiths have forgiven my sin. They've given me their absolution. Who are you to presume they're wrong? Who are you to judge me?
All right, everybody. So if you enjoyed the content today, you can go to patreon.com/thepenskyfile to support the show. A couple dollars a month gets you extra stuff like extra podcasts. And also, if you're a Captain Tier supporter, you get a shout out. Special thanks go to Andrew Cherlog, Ben Douglas, Captain Quark, Cardinal Doomsday, Christian Michaels, Christian Pouch, Darth Mosk, David Beermore, David K, Dwayne Hackett, Eric Johnson, Icy Unicorns, Yarpy, Joint Mango, Kevin Reyes, Kyle Barrett, Matt Cutler, Matt Ross, Mike Burnett, Nathan Elliott, Neil Brennan, Nick Sergi, Robert Cummins, Russell Elledge, Samuel Custer, Grim Santo, Sean Spinobi, Tark Latif, Vault 13 Hero, and Will Yates. Thank you very much for supporting the show. Thank you for listening. And now we'll go to Patreon comments. If you support the show, you get to leave your comments about upcoming episodes, and we read them and react to them. So let me see here. Did I do it? I did. I found it. Where is it? That is the last one. First one. Poindexter G. Covenant. So now we're done with the batshit crazy Dukat and moved on to manipulative, self-serving Dukat. It's the last we see of him before the pure, dag, nasty, evil Dukat. There were a number of crazy cults in the 90s. Heaven's Gate wasn't much before this. David Koresh a few years back. And there were a rash of cult-based episodes of TV shows. X-Files and Stargate SG-1 also get into it. This really seems along the same lines of those episodes. It's just kind of there, not really standing out. It was a time of popular cult activity, I guess. Yeah, cults are still always popular.
Popular culture, you might
That's
say.
Right. Yes, pop culture. There's got to be a podcast called Pop Culture, right? About
if there's not, I'm writing a comic called Pop Culture because that's too good of a title not to use.
Norman Buckwald says, so what we get from Dukat until the final 10-episode arc this season is an episode as a Bajoran satanic cult leader. The common cult tropes are all there, and appropriately, Dukat is indirectly recreating his own Bajoran slave station again. But if we were to evaluate this episode with respect to character development, Dukat comes across as a cartoonish villain, and Kira the protagonist to stop him. And how many times is Kira going to be abducted in this series? The episode is fun to watch, but does it add much to the story of the series? Not really. And at this point in the 7th season, Dukat does not seem as complex as 2nd season Seska of Voyager to compare recurring villains. And that is frustrating. Alemo's great acting makes this version of Dukat believable, at least. 2.5 out of 5. I did want to I just wanted to stress that I think the other thing that the episode does kind of brilliantly is ties Dukat's desire to control Bajor into this Pah-Wraith thing. And that's when the episode is really good. When it's not clear what it is in Kira, you should spend a good portion of this episode wondering if Kira has it wrong, right? And Kira never seems to have it wrong. She seems to always have him dead to rights, and she eventually ends the episode by saying she was right, and she was right about this whole thing. But I think the episode would have benefited more from having some doubt about whether or not Kira is right about what he wants, and whether or not she's just being cruel, and not cruel because he's a douchebag, but like whether or not she just won't allow for the fact that Dukat could be a new person. They don't stress that enough.
Yeah. And I did want to mention that it is kind of weird that apparently Dukat can just beam Kira into his ship or into the past whenever he wants to.
Yes. Dominion transporters, technology of the 25th century, I think that they've got there. They can go 3 light years.
If they don't do that, I'm surprised that wasn't more of a thing, because that's a really terrifying weapon.
Why don't in Siege
if you could just have someone like walk up to Cisco and throw a crystal at him, and all of a sudden they zip him out of there 3 light years away? That's a pretty effective weapon.
You'd think that if you head to Siege AR-558, the Dominion should just beam everybody out of there, right? And just beam them into space and be like, all right, now it's open. We can go in and get them. Oh, plot holes. How dare these plot holes ruin my experience?
That's not a plot hole.
I know, I'm being sarcastic. Captain Quark says, overall, this is an entertaining episode. The best part was the oh shit look on Dukat's face when he sees that the newborn is half Cardassian. Dukat actually makes a decent case for the Pah-Wraiths over the Prophets. I can buy these cultists following him, but it strains credulity that they would continue to do so after they see the baby. Marco Lamo is always a joy to watch in this role, but it feels like the producers are keeping the character around just because the performance is great. I really think the character is superfluous at this point, and his storyline should have ended after the station occupation arc or at the latest after Waltz.
As I was watching it, I was kind of hoping that Vedic Fauntleroy, Fala, was going to be more in with the cult idea, and it wasn't just going to be, oh, this is what I believe now. I was expecting it to be like, if this was a real cult thing. I mean, they ended up doing it sort of with the baby, but it would be Vedic Fala walking around, showing Kira however, the ropes of everything, and then being like, oh, and these are my 10 young wives.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like have him be like, oh, yes, no, this is clearly the right way to do it. And I'm just, these are all of my wives that the Pah-Wraiths have told me that I am allowed to take. Like there wasn't that true skewing of belief into the what's the word I'm looking for? The perverting of the actual ideas.
Yeah, the original idea. Being
it's very much its own thing. It's like the Pah-Wraiths are separate from the Prophets, and it's not like a bunch of people who believe in the Prophets are now interpreting the Prophets, interpreting that belief system differently to be like, oh, well, the Prophets actually say that we should marry our cousins. It was none of that stuff.
Yeah. There's not the bizarre twist that a cult usually puts onto something to keep it going. I did like the fact that it's another case of the Dukat being the leader of this group makes a lot of sense with the sort of like permission slip you need to have a baby. Like that controlling their sexuality is a very cult thing to do because cults are basically obsessed with sex. And Dukat doing that ties in perfectly with his previous character of the sort of like the abuser of women from the occupation arc and stuff like that. And I think that's really clever and it works really nicely. Like there's a lot of really good dovetailing here. I think that mostly the problem is how necessary is Dukat at this point, unfortunately. And and I think that they're going to make him necessary, but to get him to this point, you have to have this awkward episode where he just kind of flips into a different character and comes back on you. So we'll see. Covenant. Zamnuker Wessel says, the Battlestar Galactica parallels continue, with Dukat's bunch looking like a draft version of what President Roslin would call Baltar's girly groupie sex whatever they are. Though Baltar would have been glib enough to argue that by having sex,
I've been to that store.
By having sex, they were furthering the Pah-Wraith's plan. Next comment goes to David Beardmore. I feel like this did a good job of exploring how cults can work in a technology-filled sci-fi, but it's somewhat awkward and out of place in the arc of the season. Battlestar Galactica in 2004 did it much better with Gaius Baltar. Side note, who looks disturbingly like Bashir. Not to spoil anything, but I feel they could have done a better job of introducing Dukat's ability to influence Bajorans through religion. Samuel S. says, what a weird episode. I have no idea what happened in the airlock scene where that woman was somehow not sucked out into the vacuum of space. I'm less than thrilled that the show has turned Dukat into Joel Osteen. Getting past that, I think the one thing that would have made this episode more compelling is if we did not see Dukat praying, and the show left it up to the audience to decide if his newfound faith was genuine or not. Other than that, nothing that I really wanted to see. 2 out of 5. Kyle Barrett says, as a fan of Prometheus, I was disappointed by this follow-up. It looks beautiful and there's some good sequences, but overall it feels like 2 different films squished together. The Prometheus sequel elements are decent, but a straight-up alien stuff is poor. Although, despite the Disney merger, I hope Ridley Scott will still get to make the 3rd installment in his weird trilogy. Oh, shit, wrong Covenant. This episode's not good, but maybe it was worth it just to hear Dukat say, it was only inside of me for a very short time, but it helped open my heart.
Yeah, I agree. I love Prometheus. Covenant has a couple good scenes, but is generally kind of a shitty film. The thing coming out of that dude's back was pretty good, but also, not to go on a rant about Covenant, but we're here, so we may as well. Have you seen it?
I have not. I don't think so. I've seen Prometheus.
This isn't going to make any sense to you then,
sure.
But I'm going to say it anyway because I have a microphone in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
They set up the whole story. Did you see Prometheus?
I did.
Okay. The whole story of Covenant is that they end up on this planet and they find David, the
android.
Yeah, the android from Prometheus living there by himself, being really morose over the fact that he is a being who cannot create life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he's been doing all these like genetic manipulations with the creatures, the alien creatures and stuff, and you see all this shit, blah 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 blah. And up until this point, you haven't seen like the alien proper, like the classic alien. It's all these like weird proto aliens and stuff that, you haven't seen the Giger original style alien until they, he happens to have a room full of eggs that he's designed or something or evolved into the classic egg, which then, face huggers a dude. And then finally you see the original alien. Thing that killed me is the alien. The xenomorph is a biomechanical being, right? So they just left on the table the idea that why don't you have these proto aliens that aren't quite there yet become the classic alien by breeding themselves through David?
Mm-hmm.
Because then you have the creature, the organic creature melded with the robotics of the android into turning into this perfect creature that is a biomechanical killing machine.
Right.
I don't know. I just thought it was right there on the table and they didn't even go close to it.
What about the aliens as biomechanical? You're just talking about the fact that they're supposed to be the perfect machine, like killing machine, basically?
Yeah, I was always under the impression that I feel like they say it somewhere that it was a biomechanical thing. Like it's not just straight organic.
Because the black goo is a creation, right? The black goo is like
yes.
The aliens make that. It's not so the aliens are born of this technology, basically, right?
Yeah. I forget exactly how it shakes out, but yeah, generally something like that.
It's a very complicated story once they started to try to explain what was going on, but I'll have to go back and watch Covenant.
Arguably why they shouldn't do it.
Yeah. Covenant, Matthew Ross, last comment. Overall, a study in the insane cult of personality akin to a Jonestown moment without the tragedy. Regardless, Kira has another hairstyle. The schmoopiness to share between Odo and Kira is still strained, probably because the religion of Bajor is undefined. Her friend the Vedek looks so different from the others with the red highlights. Clearly, he's not evil. It's also the red earrings when Dukat tears his earring out is something that upsets me greatly when that happens. What was I saying here? Clearly, he's not evil. Weird that no one notices that weird beaming doodad till later. Don't worry, Kira is just the ex, though. She'll show up sooner or later. The followers with their red earrings on their other ear reminded me of an odd biker group. Honestly, I can't see why Kira is really there. I think the episode could have stood up on its own without her and just Dukat. I always snicker at the sideways station. It's cheaper. This episode is just another attempt to prove that Kira is more devout than she lets on, and Dukat is insane. Thank you, patrons, for your thoughts about Covenant. And now we're going to go to our thoughts here, Clay. But before we do that, I'll say one thing that we didn't really talk about is the Helvetic fella. not a great character in this. He functions basically to be the tour guide of the episode. And
yes,
for someone who is supposed to have been such an influential force in the religion of Kira growing up, he is incredibly wishy-washy and seems to have like no beliefs whatsoever that he can't abandon or pick up on a moment's notice.
Mm-hmm.
And him killing himself at the end is just that kind of like, I think that character is pathetic in a way that the show doesn't want to talk about, but he's an extremely pathetic character, I think, and they don't really get into it all that much.
And I didn't like the line either where he says, she's like, why did you do it? He's like, faith. She kind of explains it in the next scene, but even so, I was like, I don't know. That was pretty cheap.
Not believable.
Do you remember in The Simpsons when they're watching? I forget. It's a Bleeding Gums Murphy episode where they're talking about the stuff that he did, in his life, and they show a clip of him on the Cosby Show, and it's Bill Cosby. It's what's his name? It's Bill Cosby saying, "Oh, here's your grandfather, the famous jazz musician," and then his kids are like, don't we already have 4 other grandparents who are also jazz musicians? He's like, yeah, but this is also your grandfather who's a jazz musician. That's how I feel every time a new Vedic shows up and Kira apparently knows them from like when she was a kid.
Yeah.
It seems like she knows everybody. There's only like 25 to 50 people on all of Bajoran, and she knows all of them.
A lot of CDC, right? A lot of CDC classes growing up for her. I think. CCD, sorry. CDC, Center of Disease Control. That shows you how little Pah-Wraith training I had growing up, I suppose. Let's see here. So, scale of 1 to 5, Clay. What are you going to give this episode?
I'm going to give this a 4.
Oh, wow. Interesting. You went higher. I couldn't convince you otherwise.
I really enjoyed this. I like the concepts. It was the first episodic episode that they've done in a while that I thought was actually really engaging. So this one, it was a high concept episode, and I thought they did it fairly well. So it stood out to me.
Yeah, I liked it at the start. I like about the first half of it, I think. And then it gets a little bit too specific. It takes on the episodic nature that I don't care for, I guess, where they have to make it into its own little standalone episode and explain why Kira's right at the end. I like all the ideas. I like the setup. I like what they try to do. It's a little ham-fisted or whatever, but I think it just doesn't. The theme of like being unsure about faith is just undermined by the way that they have to tell that story, I think. And that knocks it down for me. But I still think it's a pretty interesting episode. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. Certainly not bad. It's a good 3. I was thinking while I was watching it, wrapping it up too. It's not a bad 3. It's a good 3. But yeah, it is what it is. And we'll see where Dukat comes from here. So guys, thank you very much for listening. Thank you for supporting the show. Patreon.com/thepenskypal. If you want to support us there, it's much appreciated. Otherwise, Facebook, Twitter, Discord, Instagram, all that stuff is down below. You can click the links. I think that's it. Clay, do you have anything you want to say before we head out of here?
I don't think so. We're going to be doing a Halloween edition of Real Ripe and Real Rotten pretty soon. We're going to be doing Wes Craven movies, so that should be fun.
Yep, which are Nightmare Before Elm Street and Vampire in Brooklyn.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Very different movie.
Nightmare on Elm Street and Vampire in Brooklyn. So...
And I don't know what we're going to do for the third one. He has a few interesting ones to choose from.
We'll figure it out. But that should be coming out around Halloween. We're trying to, we'll see if we can get it done for Halloween. But if not, it'll be around Halloween anyway. So our next one up is It's Only a Paper Moon on DS9. It's Nog dealing with the loss of his leg. It's that episode. So we're going to follow up with Nog. And I guess we'll follow up with the podcast. And we'll follow up with our coverage of DS9. Until then, see ya.